All right, everyone. Thanks for joining the Jesus Famous podcast. Today, we have a special episode where we're going to be reflecting on a recent series that our church has been doing. Don't be alarmed if you are hearing that word series and thinking that Nate Holdridge and Calvary Monterey has gone topical. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're expositing various passages of Scripture, not in sequence, though, to look at the theology of work, taking 4 weeks to do that before we get back into our straight line-by-line exposition, beginning with the book of Habakkuk in a couple of weeks' time at the point of this recording. But it's been edifying and encouraging to think about the subject of work and career. And today I'm going to have a conversation with a man in our church, a godly brother named Ernst Van Eeghen. He's been on the podcast before talking about grief and loss and death and trial and tragedy, and then God working in the midst of that. I'm sure many of you heard that conversation and were greatly blessed by it. But Ernst works in the ag industry here locally to the Monterey County and has a beautiful wife and a couple of crazy twin daughters that he loves with all of his heart. And so we're going to have a great conversation today, just thinking about how Christianity, how the faith, how a walk with God, a relationship with Jesus, it's impacted Ernst in the workplace. And I think he's going to share with us, quite honestly, about some of the struggles of being a Christian in his line of work and some of the challenges that have been presented to him as a man of faith, sometimes surrounded by people who don't have that same value system. And I think if we're honest and raw about the reality of our experiences, we all recognize that it's a challenge. So, Ernst, great to have you today talking about this subject.
You're welcome, yeah.
I would love to begin, Ernst, by just having you try to explain, and I've got plenty of friends that are in the ag industry, and whenever I ask them, what is it specifically that you do? A lot of them give me an explanation that I don't understand. So give it a shot for people listening. What do you do?
So I work for a company called Church Brothers Farms, and they are large growers and processors of fresh vegetables for washed vegetables, but also the field direct, the unwashed stuff. We're a very large operation, and we ship all over North America to every chain restaurant and fast food place that you can imagine, the few healthy things that they carry, and other chain restaurants and every large distributor. So for a large part on the food service side of the business, and then we do some retail supermarket business as well. And I have a commercial role. For the largest part, I look at the development of our business and opening up new channels, new opportunities, in a sense being the face of the company outward and trying to create new opportunities, whether that is through new customers or new channels, which can be like selling to companies that use our product or our byproduct as an ingredient, to new operating technologies, automation, innovation, those kind of things. So it's pretty broad. I don't have a department responsibility at the moment, so that basically means that I stick my nose in everybody's business. So I got to tread lightly sometimes.
Okay. So do you have a title? What is your title?
My title is Vice President of Business Development. Yeah.
All right. So when you heard that I was going to do a short series on the theology of work, and we've called it Wholehearted Work based off Colossians 3:23, which says that we should, whatever we do, work heartily as unto the Lord and not to men. I think I remember talking to you personally some time ago saying, I think I want to share this with the church. I've been reading a lot about this subject, taking some classes to think about it. What was your first reaction? What did you begin thinking?
Oh, snap.
Oh, snap. Okay. Expand.
I think My reaction wasn't, of course, really, oh, snap, but I think it's very relevant. I think we are in an era where there's a tremendous amount of pressure placed on work. And I think even at times work has too much of a priority in our lives. We extract sometimes our identity from it, and that's obviously an error. We place it over family sometimes. We place it over our convictions, our moral compass gets distracted by it sometimes.
Yeah.
And we tend to lose ourselves in it sometimes, and I'm one of them. So when I heard you were going to do this, I was actually pretty excited because my work has been always with ups and downs. For the most part, ups. I've been very blessed, but it comes with challenges, and especially answering to those in a Christian way can be very challenging in any business, but certainly in the produce business.
Yeah. I wonder, was there any part of you that thought, what's this guy going to say about work? He doesn't know my situation. He's in the church. He's just there, studying the Bible all day long. What could he say that's of practical help? Or were you kind of like, wow, the Bible, maybe it has some things for me here?
Yeah, that latter part.
Okay, so you trusted me.
Yeah, I did, and
For the word.
And I trusted you, of course, and I trust the Bible, and I was honestly very excited to extract from the Word anything that relates to our day-to-day work, because there's not one book about it, or specifically, as far as I know, that addresses it. So. It needs to be gleaned from different sections. So I was very excited by it because Lord knows that I need it.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you some specific questions about some of the concepts we've been thinking about as we've been going through it. And at this point, we're not completely done with the series at the time that we're sitting down for this conversation. Probably by the time we air this conversation, we'll be completely finished with the series. But we've thought about why work matters. We've thought about why work is hard. And then in our last study, we thought about how to do good work. But before thinking about those things, I know for you, and you kind of alluded to this already, just knowing you personally, you're a family man. You have a high value of being there for your kids, helping them grow up into maturity, being a good husband. This is a big part of your value system. You have a demanding job. You've always had demanding jobs as long as I've known you, where you've got to travel and there's, long hours, and I'm sure you're not able to just kind of clock out at the end of the day and just transition really easily because there's decisions and pressures that you're processing. So I wonder if you could speak into that for a moment. What is that tension like for you? And does it cause you to despise your work sometimes? Does it cause you to want to leave your work and look for something else? What is that tension like? Have you found the perfect balance?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
That is a journey as well, but there's a lot of questions you just asked me. So I'll going back to the first one. I think I needed to find a balance between work Ernst and at home Ernst, and the two are different. And at work, I am definitely super high energy, very dynamic, borderline loud. And that kind of energy is needed in our business because the produce business, the farming business, is very demanding and dynamic because of the short shelf life of the product. When things get cut, it needs to move.
Yeah.
When we plant a seed, a farmer wants to see something grow, and we better sell it. So this constant time pressure that we have on the product that we market is also producing a certain atmosphere in the office that is really high energy, very intense, a lot of communication, healthy communication, and sometimes not so healthy communication. I always like to say that produce is spelled with a P of problems, because on a good day with perfect temperatures and sunlight and water, pretty much everybody can grow a head of lettuce in their backyard. But what do you do when things are not so well? And our customers are not very understanding of that. They want to see the same product every single day, while every head of lettuce looks different. And we bridge that gap. And that translates itself into a very intense and overly dynamic workplace where the language can be very colorful. And in my specific role, I'm subject to that. I am part of that to a certain extent. In addition to that, I'm much outward looking. So I'm out and about with customers where we have business meetings, but we also have dinners, or we have drinks together. And I got to watch myself very carefully that those two people, the work Ernst is not the home Ernst. When I go home, I want to be calm as I can be, because I do understand that I've got a big personality, and my demeanor rubs off on other people. When I walk into the home with my work hat on, things get a little chaotic at home as well.
Right. Yeah.
And Jeff Buck taught me many years ago to, instead of going home immediately after a day in the office, to sit around the corner from your house in your car, turn off the radio, and decompress for 10 minutes, 15 minutes in complete silence. And that has helped me a lot, because that allows me to get the temperature at the appropriate level for me to expose myself to my wife and my children. And people in my work always laugh about, poor Gretchen. She has to live with him every day. And they don't know that at home I'm a completely different person. Now, I did recently, probably in the last year, get convicted for that, because I don't think that's necessarily healthy. And I'm not saying that it's unhealthy, but I wanted to start focusing on bringing these two Ernst personalities closer together. And the idea was, I feel at home because there's no external threats. There's no pile of work to be done.
Right.
I can breathe. At work, that's not the case. But how can I bridge that? How can I feel more at home at work? And that's kind of like a project I picked up maybe it's already 2 years ago, where I started working on that. How can I achieve that? Which meant that I had to look inside and even look at my own situation. Do I really feel threats in the workplace? And the answer is very often you do. Yeah. Whether they're real or not, you can sense them as that. And that can have something to do with your performance, with your insecurities, with your path, with your expectations, or with your coworkers. And that can be your peers, but it can be your superiors as well. So there's a lot of things going on at work that you don't have going on at home. And I think one of the things that I realized that I have to change, because my work is not going to change. And that's why this series about what God has to tell us about work really focuses on us and not necessarily on work. And I experienced that firsthand a couple of years ago in some pretty intense pressures at work as well, where God actually stepped in a very tangible way, but not in the way that I expected it to be.
Sure.
So to bring those two people together, I think that's important.
Yeah, I think it sounds like what you're saying is in the workplace, there's all these things that force you to trust the Lord, because they can be frightening. It can be, you can feel vulnerable. There's challenges and obstacles or threats, like you said, either perceived or real. And it's an opportunity to either take it all onto myself or to really trust the Lord. I'm sure as your girls age and when they get into those teenage years, you'll probably feel a little bit more of the threats there, where
Yes.
you're, okay, now I
Yeah.
have an opportunity even more to be trusting the Lord in my home. And I think I understand what you're saying here about the two Ernsts. You're not, you're saying, what I want to have is a little bit more of that mature work mode Ernst and home mode Ernst, but I don't want to have the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde
Right.
Ernst,
Right.
the
Yeah.
crazy, insane guy, and then the gentle, giant kind of guy. And for
Right.
those who are just listening to this and have never met you, you're not a small person.
No.
We're both sizable men
Yes.
sitting here in this
Yeah.
room together. So I can just imagine that intensity in your workplace. Everybody that I've known in the ag industry, when they describe what it's like buying and selling and moving and shipping and all of that, it sounds to me really similar to what you see on like the New York Stock Exchange,
Right.
Everybody on the floor and just the constant,
Yep.
phone calls and buying and selling, and that energy level, you're riding a wave of stress in your work.
Yeah.
And some people think that all stress is bad. There's a version of stress called eustress. It actually is productive. I think God gives it to us. But when you're riding that for a whole day, every day, and then you go home to try to be a parent or a husband with that same intensity or energy, it has a damaging effect.
Right.
And I think probably every one of us that are, thinking about our work and our, life with the Lord and different key relationships we have, I think we could all relate to that to some degree. You might not have a job that is stressful like Ernst is describing, but there's some other pressure, that there is a kind of stress that's there. And being able to shift gears. For me as a pastor, a lot of times it's that I'm exposed to trauma or, forms of sin that have been really destructive. Mm-hmm. And you get exposed to those things as you're trying to help people. And it can give you, much like potentially like a police officer or someone like that, a jaded view of humanity.
Right.
And so you have to do the sit in the car thing and have that moment of transition where you realize this is my home, or this is my church family, these are my friends, and I want to shift gears right now, because not everything that I've been feeling for the last 8 or 9 hours is reality.
Right.
And there's something better. These relationships are important
Yeah.
in my life. So I'm curious, Ernst, the first teaching that I gave on this subject was why work matters. And in that study, I talked about how it matters because it's godly. God was the first worker, so we can imitate God by doing work. I talked about how we can represent Jesus's kingdom with our work, that he's our king, and people can't see our king, but they can see us. So are we responding to our king's leadership? I talked about it as a way to love our neighbor as ourselves. So whether it's loving our families because we're providing for them, or loving our society because we're taking care of our piece of the pie and creating value for others, or our coworkers, because when we do good work, it benefits them. Lots of different ways we can love others, or even being a good Christian witness in the workplace. And then I talked about how it sanctifies us.
Yeah.
Work matters because it's one of God's big ways to mature us into Christ's image. And then I talked about how it's eternal. Right. We'll probably be working in a different way than we are now, but we'll probably be working forever. So I'm curious, how did that concept or that teaching hit you? And what were some of the of those concepts that really resonated with you?
Well, it resonated on pretty much all the levels that you just said. It's almost like a reminder that work is about everything that we do almost, and for me it has changed since I found my faith. I certainly am still focused on my career. It's not my big goal to get bigger, better, more money and those kind of things, but I think for me it's being a parent. There's a responsibility I have financially towards them. I want to give them not everything they want, but I want to give them as much as I can, or I want to be able to give them what they need.
Yeah,
Let's
I could see
put
you
it like that.
groping for the words. Like,
Yeah.
what do I want to
Yeah.
say? I want to give them everything they want
Yeah.
without ruining them.
Yeah, right. So, and that resonates to me in my upbringing, where I was very privileged, but never spoiled. But in hindsight, of course, extremely privileged. I want to be very careful with the girls on that, what I give them, but I want to, I'd give everything up for them, at the same time. But on the second part of that, being a provider, I want to be able to set an example for them that work is good, and that working hard is good. And I think the biggest lesson I want to teach them is when you work for something, there's going to be most often a reward. So work is worth it. I didn't grow up with that because the reward was pretty much already there. So that's something that's important for me. And then I love to serve the people I work with. I'm in a senior management role, so very often I'm called to direct, if you will, but I found it much more satisfying and honestly also effective to serve people in my team that I work with in different departments. And I made it very clear to everybody in my company knows that I'm a follower of Christ. And that brings a great level of responsibility with it as well.
Yeah, a lot
and
of
some
accountability
yeah,
there, right?
Yeah, which I need.
Yeah.
My personality needs that.
Yeah.
And it's of course also subject to a little bit of mocking sometimes, which
Sure.
I'm fine with, because I mock them too, just on different ways, and I'm pretty good at it too. So, but you reap what you sow. So I like to have fun as well. So we have a lot of fun with that, but in different ways.
Yeah.
But I love the concept of honoring the Lord with your work through your influence, your sphere of influence, and that's for me mainly with working with people and serving them what they need. I think I wanna be an example how you can survive in this business without losing your mind every so often and absolutely blow up, and that happens fairly frequently in our office as well, and in produce business where people just lose it. But
I'm picturing everybody like getting out their cell phones and just recording like
oh,
the
absolutely.
most recent meltdown.
Yeah. And we got good stories, and we can have good laughs about it.
I'm curious. I wanted to ask you, because you said that you're in your position as vice president, your heart and desire is to serve the people that are working for you, your team.
Yeah.
And that is such a Jesus-y concept. Jesus told his disciples that the greatest are the least, and to take the posture of a servant. So what are some of the ways that you implement that Christ service kind of focus towards the people on your team? How do you do that? How do you serve them?
There's of course a lot of like specific examples, but very often in senior roles, people come to you and deliver things to you because you need them for something. And for me, very often it's like, start it yourself or do it together with that person. You ask them for something as let's work on a report together, or let's work on a promotion together, instead of just, here's what I need. I need it in, exactly 13 and a half hours or else, no. And I think it has to do with engagement, instead of just following the structure of a corporate hierarchy where that person simply has to report or deliver to you. And I think sometimes almost if you look at an org chart, is serving others means that you need to take a step down this org chart and then go up together, something like that. So I've in previous companies that I work with also, I've had a lot of pride in building up talent, and see people do really, really well. And even after I leave a company, you stay in touch, and you get that gratitude, which is nice to get, but it also it gives you a kingdom feeling. So it's not like a tap on my own shoulder, good job, Ernst, you've done something nice, but it feels good. It just feels better. If I tell myself I just go to work at 6:30 in the morning just to make enough money to make my payments and have some savings for the girls' college fund, I find no satisfaction in that at all. Now, the opposite is, I'm going to work at 6:30 in the morning to feed the world. That's not realistic either. But somewhere in the middle, you can probably find a good balance with a mindset of you're there for a reason, that also keeps a little bit of fair distance between your home life and your work life, because your work life will never be your home life, or I hope it wouldn't be. But I think it's also healthy to keep that separated as well. But to have a greater view on what you do definitely for me, is helpful.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because you talked about the enjoyment and fulfillment that comes from building up other people.
Yeah.
And that's such a Christ focus and heart. At the end of the day, even though it's about moving product and money around the nation and beyond in your line of work, at the end of the day, it's about human beings that are part of that process.
Right.
And Jesus was the ultimate model of helping people become the best version of themselves. Right. And I think it's a very Christ emulating thing for those in authority or power to help those around them and under them really rise up and become the greatest version of themselves that they can become. So pouring into the people around you, being interested in the people around you. And I think that's your Christianity has, helped you become that. I think you're probably a real naturally, people orient. You're a real outward gregarious kind of guy, but I think having the Lord get a hold of that, because you can be outward and gregarious and just use that to manipulate people all day long. Yeah. So for the Lord to get a hold of that and to help you develop others, what are some other ways you think that, sometimes I think as Christians we think about, I'm a believer in the workplace, therefore there will be challenges, because I'm the guy that sticks out like a sore thumb. Every company party, every time that people are just cutting it up, every time we're getting a little vicious and making a decision, I stick out like a sore thumb. But I think sometimes we don't take time to think about how our Christianity has helped us become really good at what we do. So I want to ask you, what are some ways that you think your walk with the Lord has made you better at what you do?
Right.
So like, for instance, in my life, so much of what I do has little to no immediate supervision. I mean, in a sense, it's like I work for God.
Yeah.
So I have the greatest supervisor that there is. He's with me at all times. But all of us are to have that mentality that we work for God. I just don't really have a lot of people. I have people around me. I do have some people over me. But the reality is, in my day-to-day, it's kind of up to me. I got to make sure that I'm disciplined to really move forward the things that I'm supposed to be working on. Well, the Lord has really been the one to help me with that over the years. He's shaped my character. I can't imagine becoming a disciplined person without him. I'm not naturally like that. But I've seen how he's done that in my life. And I think that I could probably go into a different work environment and I'd have the same kind of discipline that I have now, because it's the Lord that's helped produce that in my life. So what are some of the ways for you that you've become better at work because you know Jesus?
I think number one is it's around the commandment to love each other. And I wouldn't use the word love necessarily in my workplace, but I'd like to replace it with care, which has love embedded in it. So how it's really helped me is knowing the people, wanting to get to know people that I work with. It's very easy to take things at face value, and very deceiving to take things at face value, but that's what we do, to just judge somebody on just their work or the way they talk or the way they dress or whatever like it. But get to know somebody and build that, maybe that trust factor. So I'm easy to open up. People know about my life, not just my Christian life, but my whole life with my struggles, with my pains, with my honesty in life. I don't try to pretend something that I'm not. And I think that is probably the first thing I would say has helped a lot, is asking a little further how you doing, and don't continue. Good morning, how are you? Good. And keep walking. No, you want to. I ask questions. I get to know people. I'm a people person. That's without a shadow of a doubt. But to actually exercise that in the workplace, that probably produces, in a sense, also some compassion and some understanding. And I think it, love essentially comes out of it.
That's such a great thing that you just mentioned there, that like genuine care about others. And I agree with you. You probably don't want to throw the love word around in your workplace, but being caring towards others. There's a story, I talked about the life of Joseph in our last teaching on work. And when Joseph was in prison, he was first sold into slavery, and then eventually he became Pharaoh's right-hand man. But in between, he went to prison, and he was faithful. He ascended into leadership right there in the prison, even as a prisoner. But there came a moment where he saw two prisoners who had come from Pharaoh's household. And when he saw them, it literally says this in Genesis 40, verse 7. It says, he saw that they were troubled, so he asked them, why are your faces downcast today? And the simple act of asking that question is what caused them to share the dreams that they'd had the previous night with him. And then he received the interpretation from God for those dreams. And that, of course, is a thing that opened the door eventually for him to have an audience with Pharaoh. I say that just to say we shouldn't go around asking people how are they doing for self-serving reasons. But when we are able to do it with a genuine heart, it opens up doors, man, because you're building a bridge in someone else's life, and you have no idea what connections might happen because of them who are now connected to you in their future. So it's actually great career advice to be caring towards other people. Not that we're doing it in that manipulative kind of way and reason, but I just have always loved that from Joseph, that willingness to just look someone in the eye and take the moment to say, hey, it seems like something's going on for you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Is there more? Would you like to share with me? And I'm sure in your position as a vice president, there's probably moments where you just get a little chance to have someone open up to you that, maybe they wouldn't, otherwise, but to stop and care for them and say, how are you? That's just so special and important.
It will translate itself even to like prayer requests. Recently I just got one from a coworker who has a niece who's has some medical issues, a 4-month-old baby, and she comes to me and she asks me to pray because she knows I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
Those are opportunities, and it's not just in the workplace. For me, probably even when I go out with customers, and these are big chain companies and the restaurants that I go out with, and even a prayer before a meal when you share a meal together. I'm always careful doing it if I know that there may be somebody there that's not of my faith or no faith, but let's say it's clearly that somebody is a Hindu or a Muslim, then I'll refrain from it, although at one point I have done it, but made it more generic. But it's a great opportunity for me to pray for the people there, for our time together, for the work that we do, to have God's hand in it, and help us to provide for our families. I pray for the people that I'm having dinner with their families that are not with us here. So make it very specific about their lives, and more than often people are really grateful. It's like, thank you. Mm-hmm. Because maybe people are used to a standard little prayer or something like that, and here's somebody specifically praying for their children or their spouses. People are not used to it, so for me it's very often an opportunity, and I love opportunities. Mm-hmm. If anytime I can have an opportunity to, share the gospel without being pushy about it, I'll absolutely do it. Mm-hmm. So it's both in the office and in my work with customers.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Talk to me about, in our second study on work, we thought for a little while about why work is hard, and you've already talked about how your work is not easy. There's challenges attached to it. Have you ever sat back and thought about, because in the teaching I shared, it's something that we all, I think, know that it's sin in the universe that makes our work hard. There's just challenges. You're working in ag. You're experiencing the direct results of the curse. The ground was affected. Yeah. Thorns and thistles it will bear for you. By the sweat of your brow you will eat bread. And then there's personal sin, the things that we do that kind of sabotage. We self-sabotage our work. What are some of the ways that you've seen in your workplace that work is harder because of the presence of sin? You mentioned earlier to me before we started recording, and I think you alluded to it a little bit even in this session, the unpredictability of the natural elements, that sometimes there's drought and there's nothing that you can do about it. And I think that is one of the implications of the fall. Your work has been made harder. It's harder to get produce because of the unpredictability of the elements, and we're at the mercy of this broken place. So what are some ways that work is made harder for you guys because of sin?
Well, I think that first one is a good point. Things are not perfect. And the produce coming out of the field is not always perfect. We are not in a business where I get a compliment of, man, Ernst, the lettuce you sent me today, that was awesome. I never get those. When I get a phone call from a customer, it's usually not good. Something is up, right? So very often, subconsciously, you get into defense mode. And sometimes you're more cornered than other cases, but when we're cornered, we tend to sometimes not respond properly. And I'm guilty of that too. Not that I'm going to lose my mind and start yelling at somebody and cussing, but that can happen. Or you can start deflecting the truth with or excuses, or even not telling the truth, or blaming someone else. For me, in this time in my career, pride is probably my biggest enemy and my biggest sin, because I'm pretty deep into my career. I've got 20 years under my belt, and I know stuff, right? And I want people to know that I know stuff. And even that mindset by itself is not very healthy, right? But it's in me. And I've got so much passion for what I do that it's that pride that I have in what we do can be easily accompanied by the notion that, I know everything there's to know about it.
Right.
And that's something I struggle with. I've recently struggled with some management changes on the senior side in our company, where there were some changes made that I didn't necessarily like, and it affected me directly. And my pride really got in the way. And my reaction was, enough of this. They don't care enough about me. I need to get out of here. And I contemplated this seriously. I was like, I'm going to be out, and I start praying to God, because if I'm going to go out, I'm going to do it in a godly way, right? So I started praying, God, give me, open up a new job somewhere else. And I did a few times, but the situation didn't change. And I kept on praying and praying and praying. And the Lord ended up answering that prayer by not giving me a new job and changing the circumstances, but he ended up giving me a new set of eyes to see it through. And where I realized that it was my pride, it was my sin getting in the way. And so he did a root cause analysis God did on me. And it's like, the new job is not going to help you, because eventually you're going to face something similar. You need to change. And something in my heart needed to change, and he did. And I'm much more at ease about it. I don't have any resentment. I started really focusing on especially the service of the people around me, and consequently, we're getting better and good and more cohesive. So it was a very typical kind of like, I have one way of, thinking what the right solution, next steps would be. But of course he knew better. And I'm glad actually that the Lord at least gave me patience, that I didn't run, because I could have easily ran. But I think those are things that pride is probably the biggest one for me.
That's great. That's a super example. I think a lot of people would resonate with that. I think especially when you're in this kind of stage of career that you're in. And I'm in a similar stage, kind of probably close in the number of years of experience in a given field. And yeah, you can kind of get to a point where you start feeling that you've seen a lot, you know a lot, and you can begin trusting your own instincts. And we got to lean back on the Lord. And of course, that humble spirit, that keeps us hungry, teachable, learning more, sharpening our skills. So that humble spirit is so important. And pride can really crush the teachability that we need to really excel in our workplaces. Well, Ernst, as we wrap it up, I am curious, our final teaching that we've looked at in the series is on how to do good work. And I'd like to ask you if there's an encouragement or an exhortation that you have for the people listening to this on how to do good work in their workplaces, a perspective perhaps, something that you've learned that has helped you do quality work in your workplace. In that teaching, I talked about how we need to see our work as being done always for our master in heaven, and I love the idea that there's a boss behind the boss, and then I talked about how there's a paycheck behind the paycheck, there's the inheritance and the reward that is coming in heaven, and what a comfort that would have been to the original slaves and bondservants in the Colossian church that heard that from Paul the Apostle in Colossians chapter 3, that man, after this life of painful toil, they weren't vice presidents and senior pastors, they were, forgotten workers, and after a life of painful toil, God would right the ship and overturn and set everything right. What an encouragement that would have been to them. But do you have an exhortation, an encouragement to the people listening on how to do good work?
Well, what I need to remind myself of is that at work I need to speak less and listen more. And it's something I just recently shared even at Regen, is the power of pausing. And that's something I actively pursue and exercise, is not respond immediately. There's a difference between a reaction and a response. Let's choose the response. And in order for that to happen, you need to pause sometimes. And I learn more listening sometimes to people, even people that haven't been in the business. So I go into meetings praying for giving me the ability to listen and give me something that can change my mind. Like pray for it specifically, because that's what's going to make me better too. If I just lean on my own wisdom, I'm not getting any smarter. So sometimes it's good to be challenged in that. So I think the power of pausing is for me a big one. And the second thing that I would like to say is, I think it's good that people know that you're a Christian, because eventually you will come to the conclusion that you better live that out if you say it out loud.
Yeah.
And that for me is very helpful.
Yeah.
So it's a form of accountability.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. There's ways to tactfully and respectfully communicate that you're a Jesus follower. Without, you don't have to make it a confrontation, but something you are admitting and that you're not embarrassed of, but that perhaps people need to know about you because it's a really big part of what shapes your values.
Right.
I love what you shared though about the being slow to speak and quick to listen. This comes from James chapter 1, verse 19. Every person should be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So Ernst, praying for you in your workplace. I know with the hectic nature of that line of work, there are times where it feels like the wrath of man produces produce and gets it where it needs to go. Yeah. But to have the peace and the trust that, no, that's not the route. There's a better way. I could get results in the short term that way, but there's a long-term path that actually leads to greater fruitfulness. And I'll be praying for you just with the nuanced challenges that are presented that are unique to you in your workplace. But I'm proud of you in the way that you're trying hard to let Jesus be the king of your life in your home and also in your workplace. So thanks for opening up and talking to us a little bit today.
We pray that today's discussion has blessed you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue to reach people and make Jesus famous in our lives and the lives around us. Until next time, God bless.